Islam, 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 Moorish America. Want to rise and give all praises to the great God, Allah, our Father God, Allah, and honors to his holy prophet, honors to our holy prophet, Noble Drew Ali, El-Hajj Sharif Abdul Ali, that is. We give honors to our Moorish kin once again, here, there, and everywhere, and therefore honors to all of you who are continuously honoring yourselves by being yourselves. We give honors to our Grand National Seal, Grand National Emblem, National Flag, Divine Constitution and bylaws, and honors to all of you who are indeed a living manifestation and personification of everything that our holy prophet brought to make us a nation. Islam, Moorish kin. I have another grand measure to bring forth to the manifest, and this special measure hopefully will bring some clarity to those who may need it in this special area. And as you can see, we are dealing with the subject title in relation to the spiritual, physical, and metaphysical masonry of the ancient Kemetian order. And the reason why we emphasize this right here is because many of our people think what they see in the modern time under the auspices of the European and their established form of what they like to call Masonic rites and so forth and so on, you know, that this is the holy grail, you know, of the measure when it comes to dealing with what we call being builders or master builders and so forth and so on. So we are here to set the record straight in regards to dealing with this special measure. And when we deal with the spiritual, physical, and the metaphysical masonry of the A.K.O, you know, we will touch on certain drawings. And we hope that our Moorish kin or those who may be seeking some understanding in regards to certain things, they can get a grand drawing, because a hierophant, if you're familiar with the word hierophant, you know, because this is what our master teachers were in ancient Egypt, they were the grand hierophants. You know, I use the term hierophant, you know, hieru, dealing with the spirit that it deals with the relation of freedom. So you are free to teach, free to learn. Islamism, consul general, Islamism. So you are free to teach and free to learn and so forth and so on. No one has any constriction or restriction upon you. So when we talk along these lines, a hierophant is a revealer of the light. You know, now we know that the mind will never accept what it sees if the special mind has not been seasoned or made ready or open to an special perspective. So we understand that not everyone is going to comprehend everything that is put out here at this special hour. But who knows, years later, maybe time past, you know, ones would basically come into a clear conception. And when we speak of the ancient Kemetian order, you know, we are not dealing with so much of worrying about a structure. Although there are many structures that represent the ancient Kemetian order, you know, we are more considering the aspects of how, you know, this measure relates to the measure of self. You know, as it is above, so it is below, and so it is within. And so this is where we get into the spiritual, the physical, and the metaphysical aspects of that. But we want to go into some of the physical expressions first and foremost, as far as dealing with the structures. And we touched on this last night in the measure that we demonstrated when we were speaking on Monachum. And this hopefully will unveil mysteries to one in regards to dealing with, you know, these structures that we see around us. And we talked about the concept of the pyramids and, you know, when they were built and all of this. But let me go down through here a little bit. we'll actually start here. Definition of the word Mason. Now, many people, when they hear this, the first thing they think about again is Western Freemasonry. But there is a difference between being one that is demonstrating ancient Masonry, as the Ancient Kemetic Order demonstrated, in the modern expression of it. Now, the modern expression claims to be based upon the original teachings of the people, but they are found lacking as well in many different areas. We don't have to go into an expose and all that type of measure, because we're not here to get into that aspect. We're here to talk about ancient Kemet. So the ancient Kemetians were masters, in Masonry, in the sense that they were not only those who were able to bring to perfection structures that had to do with building with stone or brick and so forth and so on, creating from scratch and everything else. But they were also known as master stone cutters, whereas you can see these things present now in this era and time. And there's a difference between, just a brick mason, and a stone mason, so to speak. You see? And so most of the time when you hear Masonry, people begin to again think that this is dealing with just a secret society or some fraternal type measure. So what is the physical aspect? Can't nobody go, into a more masterful expression than our ancestors. And we talked about the origin of the pyramids and how they came into existence. I want to go into some particular measures here. This actually coming from the Piscean records right here too. And this actually is speaking along the lines of when it was said that Egypt would go through a chastisement, and then, they would also be sent a redeemer. I went over this with our Moorish kin in the past. And many have failed to see this, even our family in the Hebrew community, based upon the doctrine that they teach. Many read over this, that those who are of what we call today Egypt, which we know as ancient Kemet, which is really known as Manafa or Memphis, so to speak. Basically, when you get into this special drawing, a lot of people become lost, when you deal with these measures, because they are looking at it through the European visual perspective, even to the extent to where it sinks into their very consciousness. Now, this is the part where it starts about the blessings that would come to Egypt, along with Assyria and Israel, after they had went through a chastisement that would take place. You know what? Better yet, to make it clear, we'll just go up here so you can see this. And we'll start from here, dealing with the burden that will be given to Egypt. And you will comprehend why things are as they are today. And you would also comprehend, something that you may have not known. So it was speaking of the burden here. And listen to this closely. And we'll get into the other aspects about, the building and everything else, because it touches on some of that here. At least the structures that will be placed in Egypt. It states the burden concerning Egypt. Let me stretch that out a little bit right there. It states the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud. And we only using the Piscean records for a historical measure, because it has a history in here that can be noted if you understand universal history. So it states the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. Then he states, and I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians. Now this is dealing with a judgment that will come down upon Kemet. He's saying they shall fight every one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. Then it states, and the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. Now, we want to stop right here, because by virtue of just these first two verses that's given here, if the Egyptians was set in motion to fight against each other, brother against each other, neighbor against each other, neighbor and city against city, kingdom against kingdom, then this means that one time they were not in this special state. But all this had to do with chastisement and divine appointment, you will see. And also, when it spoke on the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, if the spirit had to fail, then at one time, prior to the failing or the fall, they must have been successful. You see? We know they were. But then it states, I will destroy the counsel thereof. So this means that if the counsel would be destroyed, that at one time the counsel was a sound counsel. And they shall seek to idols, which mean if they would seek to idols before, they didn't seek idols. They knew the true God at one time, right? But it states, and they would seek to charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. In this era and time, a lot of people would say, well, that deals with voodoo and witch doctors and so forth and so on. I'll leave that to your interpretation. But nevertheless, it will be something new that will be introduced into Egypt, that had not been there previously. And this would be allowed, based upon a chastisement or disobedience. Now it says, and the Egyptians I will give over into the hand of a cruel Lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. So this would also mean that prior to this time, the one that had been in rulership, or those who had been in rulership up to this point of a cruel Lord coming to rule over the people, would have had to been a jest, until they started, falling, so to speak. And this is what led to a chastisement. Or was it that the great God Allah had a greater plan, that man don't comprehend, but he will comprehend by the time we get done with this special measure, that the common people don't pay attention to. And this is why Egypt have now become a byword among the people and a symbol of even what people try to use an expression of an evil nation or evil people. They become mocked because of what they went through. But was it divine appointment that they be slaves? Or they be a destroyed nation forever and a day? Because most of the time, when the great God Allah really want to get rid of you, he wipe everything away about you. But there's a reason why he left things to be preserved in regards to dealing with Egypt or Kemet, is because Kemet, was a world power. You're talking about the capital empire and dominion of the world, so to speak. So they, in their greatness, also had to become an example for us in this era and time. Now, let me go on. It states again, the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel Lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord of hosts. And the waters shall fall from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up, Now that brings famine, especially in Egypt, because you ain't really got too much water around the enemy. So this had to be dealing with the Nile, right? And even, oh man, this is a grand drawing. But it says, and they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and flags shall wither. Paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither and be driven away and be no more. It states that the fishes also shall mourn, and they that cast angle into the brook shall lament, and they that spread nest upon the water shall languish. Moreover, they that work in fine flax, and they that weave networks, shall be confounded, and they shall be broken in the purposes thereof, and that makes sluices of ponds for fish. Surely the princes of Zon, and Zon is actually another name for the city of On, Heliopolis, so to speak. The city of the sun, some people like to call it. But it states, surely the princes of Zon are fools. The counsel of the wise counselors of Pharaoh is become brutish. How say ye unto Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, the son of ancient kings? Now this is fallen from glory. How will you be able to say that you descend from kings after this chastisement that will be brought on the manifest, and say it with pride, basically? It states, where are they? Where are thy wise men? Let them tell thee now, and let them know what the Lord of hosts have proposed upon Egypt. The princes of Zon are become fools. The princes of Nope are deceived. And they have also seduced Egypt, even they that are the stay of the tribes thereof. Now, when you deal with those who dealing with the stay of the tribes thereof, and you dealing with everybody is saying becoming foolish and so forth, man, this is a grand drawing. Pay attention to this right here. And a lot of people like to downplay and say, yeah, there was no such thing as this person biblically and that person that. Well, all I say is prove your measure, because we can see these things historically from a historical perspective that we have read thus far have come to pass. So nobody can deny that. That wouldn't be a theory that what is said to be prophesied to happen, it came to pass. You see? But it states the Lord have mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggered in his vomit. And neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or the tail, branch or rush may do. Now this was all divine punishment. Now that's a serious situation. Now we can symbolically compare that to a chastisement that's going on right now, in this very era in time. If we pay attention to those who want to be like ancient Egypt, but they don't really have what it takes to be, what ancient Egypt really was in their divine sense before the Hyksos came and they infiltrated, and took hold of the rulership and began to place all these types of spirits of sedition and perversity and everything else that caused Egypt to be recognized, or Kemet to be recognized as what it is right now. Just a byword. But this was not meant to be a means to an end to totally destroy Kemet in and of itself. Now, let me go here further. This is where I was going to start from the beginning. This is the key. Now, this would deal with the return of the blessings back to those of Egypt, or Kemet. He stated, blessing to Egypt, Assyrian, Israel. Now, I want you Hebrew Israelites to hear this, because there are many of those who like to push, the Piscean records of what we call the Bible, and this is your book of law. If you take one portion of it, then you should take all of it. Now, many of those who have been a part of the Hebrew paradigm have been taught to have some opposition toward Egypt, because they say, well, the Egyptians enslaved Israel. Whereas we know also during that time that was dealing with those who had invaded and usurped the throne. And not only were these so-called quote-unquote Israelites being enslaved, but the actual true Egyptians were being enslaved by the Hyksos as well. You see, and some people actually identify the Hyksos with a mixture of the spirit of those of Israel in certain aspects. But that's a whole nother measure. A foreign power came to rule, and this was allowed to take place due to the instability of the rulership, and the deviation from the laws of Ma'at, so to speak. And this is how one was able to come in, are allowed or permitted to, even by divine whim, that this may take place. But now that we understand the chastisement, let's go into the blessing. It said in that day, shall Egypt be like unto a woman, and it shall be afraid for fear, because of the shaking of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he had shaken over it. And the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt, and every one that maketh mention thereof shall be afraid in himself, because of the counsel of the Lord of hosts, which he hath determined against it. Because if they seen this as a world power, and they looking at it like, man, if he did that to them, boy, we better get it right, because these supposed to have been the gods. This was a nation of gods, so to speak, It's a lesson in this, though. So they would be an example. Now, notice this is very important. It say, in that day shall 5 cities in the land of Egypt speak the language of Canaan. Now, we know that Canaan derived through the lineage of Ham or Cam anyway, so this is not surprising. So when you deal with the language of Canaan, we actually pointed this out when you deal with Proto-Sinaitic, Proto-Canaanite, the ancient Moabite tongue. You see the hieroglyphics. You go up into the temple of Hathor, in Mount Sinai. You see it on the manifest. This is why it was easy for Moses to receive his tablets and draw from that, and you see the same law in the Maadic law being the same as that which you've seen in portions of the 10 Commandments. So it said that they would speak the language of Canaan and swear to the Lord of hosts, and one shall be called the city of destruction. But this is the interesting portion here. It said, in that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. Now, what do you think that this altar is? Now, there are many different structures in ancient Kemet. What do you think that this pillar is? In order for it to be a pillar, it has to have some grand stability, so to speak. You see, in the midst of the land of Egypt. And it will be for a sign and a witness. You see? I'll let you meditate upon that. We'll get into that a little bit in a few minutes, though. So anyway, it said, for they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, those Hyksos, those people who end up usurping the throne. He shall send them, and he shall send them a Savior, a great one, and he shall deliver them. Now, we have those out here who would tell you that's Alexander the Greek. He was sent, and this is the some of the Arabs in Islam that would say this, that this was that special one. He was sent to deliver Egypt. And you have some Christian scholars That'll demonstrate the same measure. We know Moses was sent, as they say, to the lost sheep. You know, he was just say he was sent not to the lost sheep. That's Yehoshua, Jesus, they call him. But Moses was sent to deliver the Israelites, you know, from the oppression that they was under. You know, and when you do research, you find out that those who were known as the ancient Canaanites are the same people known as the Israelites in this era and time. The Canaanites are also known as Cushites. You see, they are known as Kemites, if you have that knowledge, and you can go back to some of the measures we demonstrated. You know, brothers of the same blood lineage. They all mixed up in there together, you know, because you got to think about it. If Canaan, you know, Mesra, Cush, you know, and you know, all these special ones had divine seeds that came on the manifest, then surely those who would inhabit the earth and populate that special area, you know, would be of the same blood down the line. So that should be a no-brainer to those who are listening. But nevertheless, it said that a savior, a great one, would be sent to deliver Egypt after all this chastisement. It wasn't Moses. He wasn't sent to them. You see, it was another one that was actually sent to them, or sent to Egypt. And we're going to get into that a little later. It states, and the Lord shall be known to Egypt, and the Egyptians shall know the Lord in that day, and do sacrifice and oblation. And they shall vow a vow unto the Lord, and perform it. And the Lord shall smite Egypt, and he shall smite and heal it. Now the smiting already took place with all that chastisement I came across earlier. But he said, and they shall return even to the Lord, and he shall be entreated of them, and shall heal them. So in other words, he wasn't trying to whoop them to death, but he was trying to whoop them enough so that they would bear witness that he was the great God. You see, even though they themselves represented, you know, being made in his image, hold on, don't get too cocky, you know, and this is how the pharaonic mindset eventually became. They began to cast away the teachings of the ancestors and so forth and so on. And there were those who sought to hold on to those teachings. And then, I mean, you can go into certain aspects to where, I mean, whole codes of spirituality were removed. You know, now the first person that was actually sent to them prior to that time was Tehuti. He was their divine messenger. He was the God-man of the God-men that began to teach the people. He taught Osiris. Osiris then began to civilize and so forth and so on. But that's a whole nother measure in and of itself. We can give a whole lesson on that. So nevertheless, it says, in that day shall there be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians shall come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians shall serve with the Assyrians. In that day shall Israel be the third, not the first, with Egypt. So in other words, for those who like to get caught up on the aspect, who the chosen? Well, y'all came in third place in this particular measure, Israel. You see, and with Assyria, and even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people. And I emphasize that all the time, my people. Egypt, my people. For those who like to believe that the Egyptians are just a Gentile and wicked nation, this is what your book is saying. And we really only dealing with this because we're talking about this pillar that was established in the midst thereof, and it was known as an altar to the great God to be a sign and a witness in the land. So blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hand, and Israel, mine inheritance. He referred to Israel as inheritance, Assyria the work of his hands, and Egypt as his people. So if Egypt were the people of God, and he sent them one who would be a savior to them, then wouldn't these be the people that are also respected and honored as well by those who claim to be so-called Israelites in this era and time? Because if you're going to take one part of the book, you have to take the whole of it. Now, we can say all three of these groups, out of all three of them, Egypt, Assyria, and Israel, and many other nations, many have deviated at some point in time. That's why they had to have a messenger or a divine warner sent to them at a particular period in time. And this is why I say there were many that were sent that men know of and many that man don't know of. But that's a whole nother measure. We're talking about now going back to this pillar that was placed at the border thereof in the midst of the land of Egypt, being a sign of God. And the only pillar, the most known that you can think of, have always been the pyramids. So what is the significance of this? You know, and going back to the measures of what we call, you know, ancient Masonry of the ancient Kemetian Adepts. I want to go to another reference here, and we'll get to it in a few minutes. Now, if we go into history, you heard me speaking in our last measure last night about how mountains, you know, pretty much were structures that many modern structures were carved out of. And I gave the measure in regards to dealing with the pyramids being carved out of the mountains as well. Mountains were the most sacred things, you know, to most prophets. Prophets always went up in mountains. You know, before we had these grandiose structures that we call temples and churches and synagogues and mosques, they went in mountains, which were also, you know, pretty much of a cave-like atmosphere at that time, you know, and these were places of rest. So over time, masterminds, you know, began to, we can say, lay the demonstration out, you know, and begin to become creative, you know, in stone cutting, being able to work with stone. You know, and they used a symbolic example here when they were speaking of a future house of God. And this is dealing with Israel. But it spoke of, now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. You know, this is just making another reference, you know, of these mountainous regions. And I'm showing you, I will show you that every structure that you can think about today, the most stable, and the reason why they still here after ancient times is because they were actually carved out of stone. So we remove all the mystery, what people talking about aliens built the pyramid, this was impossible, and the reason why it wasn't, we're going to bring it to you on a practical level. And then we're going to show you the real mastery in relation to dealing with these structures. But it's stated here, it said, many people shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. You know, and it even said they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, and neither shall they war anymore. Right? You hear a lot of Hebrews, Israelite brothers, quoting this is special demonstration, right? But the main key we emphasizing on is the pillars or the mountains or the altars that are referred to, you know, in these special measures more than anything. Let me go on though. I want to go to another measure because we want to get into the science. Now, in this special drawing, if you ever came into Islam, one of the main things you learn when studying the earth, you read about how the mountains become stabilizers for the earth. And I mentioned this in our previous class measure last night, which prevent the earth from shaking. So everything has a purpose and is necessary, so to speak. You know, everything that you can think of. But they give a couple of ayats here in regards to dealing with these mountains. It states the Quran in several places tells us that Allah places mountains on the earth so that the earth will not shake. And I'm using these as historical references right now and examples, you know, to give you insight as to how I came to the conclusion that I came to as far as the structures. But it states Surah 16, Ayat 15, he has set up on the earth mountains standing firm, lest it should shake with you, and the rivers and roads that ye may guide yourselves. That's one aspect, right? Then he states here in Surah 21:31, we have set on the earth mountains standing firm, lest it should shake with them, and we have made then broad highways between the mountains for them to pass through, that they may receive guidance. Then in Surah 31:10, it states he created the heavens without any pillars that ye can see, and he set on the earth mountains standing firm, lest it should shake with you. So you can see there are no pillars or anything props that's holding the heavens up, but the mountains, they act as pillars or props that stabilizes the earth so that it doesn't wobble and shake so much and so to where there's no stability, so to speak. Surah 78, and the mountains as pegs. Surah 79, 32, 33. The mountains he hath firmly fixed for use and convenience to you and your cattle. Now this is key. Firmly fixed for use and convenience to you and your cattle. Now we can't deny that these mountainous structures weren't convenient to an special people. We know they had to live somewhere in the beginning of time, and we can go all the way into this, but that's enough from that special drawing because we made a point there. Now we want to go here. Let me see. Let us take a look at one of the oldest pyramids in Kemet. This step pyramid known as Zosir. Some people, you know, they pronounce it differently, but when you look at this special drawing right here, a lot of people say, man, that's wow, that's big, that's amazing. How did they do that? But you can actually see this was the primitive form of building. You can see the technique as it was, but over time the technique began to evolve when you look at the other structures. You can also see that the stonework here, in my opinion, if I were to say how things came on the manifest, it's easy to see if ones had carved these special measures out the steps, and that they were, if they went to the top, so to speak, the same things that they were able to carve with, you know, these are some of the same stones, you know, that were used to build up a structure around the top of this special demonstration, all the way down to the bottom. Right? Now, if you would start the structure of a pyramid off like this, and everything is flat, you know, on each layer, going upon it, just as steps would be when you walk up on them. If everything was level, and just say if you started at the top, and you were carving out and chipping out, then you could easily, if you carved out and chipped out to, you know, almost a point, or may not be a point, and you begin to place these stones around the first layer, and then you descend down to the second layer and do the same thing, building your stones up as you continue to build, coming down. You do the same thing on the next layer, all the way until you get to the bottom. That takes away all the fantasy of the alienism, you know, and the miscomprehension, and why people think that this was impossible, and so forth and so on. Even if you want to make the argument, these stones are this so much and they weigh that, I have a demonstration on here where I can show you that, you know, ones were able to move in this modern time, have demonstrated that they can move a 20-ton stone by themselves with certain things they made up. And now these special demonstrations are not as big as, you know, the special stone that this particular one is moving. But I'm going to give you a demonstration of that right now, since I'm mentioning it. This is what I'm referring to here. Somebody might have seen it already. It's a European right here in the modern time, and he did this by hand.
It's 3 feet off the ground, but tomorrow is the big experiment. Standing it up.
Hold up. This was his method of doing this now. It's one man doing this, right?
He's a retired construction worker. His passion is moving heavy items. His feats always draw a crowd. Mostly.
I got a little glitching going on over here, I see.
I thought he's crazy. Who cares about moving blocks around? But then when you look at the magnitude of the weights that he's moving around, it is really impressive. He's not using any equipment or anything.
In playing with blocks, Wally thinks he's discovered how Stonehenge was moved.
This is my first Stonehenge arch I permanently put in place. 3 blocks, they weigh over a ton each.
It's all based on a very simple technique.
I found a simple explanation for this. To move a block about the weight of a minivan would be to place a stone underneath it. And once I balance on it, I can spin it. Of course, with that spin, you see, I didn't go anywhere. But I got 2 handles on my lever, and I can place another stone on this side. Now, every time I spin a half rotation on each stone, I move the block horizontally the distance between the stones. For my own output, I can move a 1-ton block 300 feet per hour.
Using this technique, he's moved everything from 1-ton blocks to buildings.
He moved up to a pole barn at one point, a 30 by 40 pole barn that he moved 300 feet for me. And it was more or less, you know, what else could we move? And he looked at me and said, hey, can we move your barn? And I said, sure, let's, you know. Next thing you know, it's 300 feet in the other direction onto another piece of property.
It can move barns, and what it's betting, it moves Stonehenge's 25-ton rocks. But raising these giants is a whole different puzzle.
This is 19,200 pounds. Yeah, it's 128 square feet cubic feet of concrete.
Today, Wally hopes to solve it. He'll put one of his theories to the test and try to stand this 19,200-pound block by himself.
I've tried to do this without any mechanical machinery at all. I've used mostly sticks and stones for my equipment. No pulleys, no hoists, no metal levers. Just try to use gravity too. I believe is my favorite tool.
The first goal is getting this block 3 feet off the ground.
In order to move it up to this point, I just rock the block back and forth, adding weight to that end, and that opens a gap on this side. And
standing it up. The grandkids have taken the day off school, and the cameras are rolling.
Hey, you guys watch Papa? He's gonna do something wild.
They're here to watch Granddad lift a block the weight of 2 bulldozers.
It's ready.
Here's how it's supposed to work.
The first thing I'm going to do here is release this temporary shoring I have set. And come over here, release some of my counterweights. And that's going to put the entire weight of the block on this rope. So then I'm going to release the rope, come back here, and the rope's going to be my brake. I'm going to guide it into the pit. The easiest way I can explain this is this is just a big teeter-totter, and I got the big kid on that end, and he's going to go down, and this end's going up.
He believes in his technique, but he's had some setbacks in the past.
One day I got thrown over top of a block, and a couple times I had the blocks roll off the top, and I almost landed on my feet. One time I knocked myself out cold on the concrete. And so it's been challenging. Are you ready? Yes! All right. So I just start spraying the sand. The sand will wash out, and the flowers will start coming down.
Once the sand is washed from the pit, the block's own weight slowly stands it up.
Okay, finally, she's between the lines, guys. Looks good.
He did it.
Okay, so I just used this video as one example to show you what one man was doing in this modern time. He used wood and other methods of, you know, counterbalancing weight and so forth and so on in order to accomplish his goal. Now, we know our ancestors were very creative. They most definitely had a grand method, and most of them were working in union. So imagine what they all could do, especially when one taught them the science. Because the way you see people building now, these methods came from the ancient ways of ones doing it. They brought them to perfection, and now they got machines that do a lot of casting, cutting, and everything. Because, you know, it's also a possibility that ones were able to even cast stone upon these special levels and then begin to build them up, you know, as a wall, so to speak. You don't see a lot of mortar going on in these demonstrations. They're really just stones that were built up, you know, but they stood the time. But at the base of these stones that were built up, I will again say they have a mountainous core. And I'm going to show you why I will say this, and I'm going to give a prime example. If you go here, and this is actually inside of the step pyramid. You see this European coming down through here. Look at that on the inside. You don't see anything in here that look like slabs of wall or, you know, that were placed here. All of that is straight, raw mountain, basically. You know, the only thing that's carved out is your stairway coming down here as well into this special demonstration. But I got another measure that's going to express it even better. It's actually here. Don't tell me Chrome want to play now. Let me see what we got here. But we know Rome ain't never built nothing that lasts. Okay, there we go. Okay. So we actually going into this special video right here. and they actually go inside the same pyramid. And they got modern they got a lot of modern restoration that has took place, you know, in this era and time, so to speak. You know, they're working on a lot of that stuff as we speak. I don't want to go through the whole video, playing a whole nother video at this special point. I'm just trying to really get to a...
Let's suppose that you're writing a really important email to a colleague.
Okay, here we go. Okay, they're showing the inside. You know, and all this stuff right here is basically planed out, so to speak, you know, to a surface that's level. You know, our people were able to do that with whatever method they use, which is, and they carved a lot of this stuff out here. You know, they didn't take slabs down here. You know, they were master stone cutters, though. Look at the precision that is here. Some people might feel like, well, they use beams of lasers and so forth and so on. You see? This is just giving one example of it, right? Okay. This is some of the mastery that they was able to demonstrate. That's not the only measure. We got another drawing over here. Where is it? Is it there? Or is it here? This is another measure of it. Same pyramid. But if you go back far here to the beginning, and you can see that they done some renovation and restoration, so to speak. But look at this down here. A lot of this stuff was carved out. Carved out of stone. I'm talking about the walkway and everything. A lot of it was perfected over time. Look at the roof. You see how rigid and rugged that is? And this is why they were able to stand so long. And yeah, over time, there were those who were able to work with brick, and there were some brick additions that were added on. But I'm speaking of the core of the structure itself, mountainous. You see that? This removes all of the myth and the mythology that you hear about these structures being built. You see? So, that's another measure I wanted to show you to further express my point. So, when you deal with the most perfected structure in the shape of a pyramid, and look at this up close, as we talked about it. Now think of the same structure now that they have become more advanced in making these structures, that they make one with the same base, and it goes around the same way as the step pyramid, but then they decide to bring the structure all the way down at a merging angle on each side. With perfection now. But you see these stones right here. So we know that at the core of this special demonstration that there's a different structure, and if you were to remove all of these stones, I guarantee you, you will find at the base of this structure a step pyramid. And they built upon it all the way down, level by level, and you have what you see now. And proof of this, because if you go in the inside, you will see the same structures of solidity. For these things to be mentioned as being, you know, some people say 50,000 years old, they didn't have cranes and the type of things that we have. And you can't even find a modern crane, you know, that can go up there that high without toppling over. You know, it's pretty much up there at that angle that they demonstrate. You know, so ones didn't have, you know, the type of things you would think about in this era and time in order to bring these things on the manifest. Nevertheless, they have stood the test of time, and they are indeed a sign to all of us as a whole as to the greatness of a people, you know, recorded languages and everything, you know, and different histories that were preserved for us. This is a site here that shows you, you know, all of the different pyramids around the world, and you will see over time the evolution of these special structures, you know, of the pyramids in different places. They begin to become masterful in the brick work. Now this one right here was real simple here, because they have stairs on it, and I can guarantee you that these stairs here were used, you know, also to basically set the stones and the blocks at each level. All they had to do is step off over here on this special, and they used the step pyramid structure, right, and build it all the way around. Nevertheless, you know, this is one of the wonders of the world as well, right? Mexico. Here's another structure here. I can guarantee you at the core, you know, that it being carved out itself and then bringing it to perfection, the stone that they had, whether they cast it or whether they just used what they had carved out, you know, and shaped it or whatever the case may be, you know, they was able to establish this structure. You see, this is in the city of Ur, the Zugarat Pyramid, right? Here's another structure. It has a more modern build to it, you know, so, and this is in India. But you can see the change over time, and this is the modern day brick and mortar structuring that we see today. You see? Here's another measure here. This is going into Mesoamerica as well. You see the step pyramid structure here. And they just let that be this. That's all they did. Pretty much them. They stuck with that step pyramid. This one here kind of went up, you know, at a merging angle. They come to a complete point, but you can see it. It's definitely a grand mound, so to speak. We just already dealt with that special demonstration. You know, the same thing here. So the most structures were always dealt with along the line of a step pyramid structure. This is the Mayan pyramids here, right? And I can guarantee you, and you can even look and see in certain places in Egypt, they have unfinished structures that were beginning to be made. This in itself here, this temple in India, carved out. I can guarantee you that. And I'm going to show you other reasons as to why we can prove these things. You know, so they go on with many different structures. You know, you have to have a base in order to build your structure on. Now, this bent pyramid here is the best example to show you. Again, you know, in order for this to be done, you know, ones actually had to start from the top and descend down as they were laying their stones all the way around this demonstration. You see, but I can guarantee you at the base, and this right here is actually like evidence right here, this ridge, that there was some type of step structure. It didn't quite go into perfection, but it looks more like they were moving toward perfecting the structure as the Great Pyramid came at a, more of a slope, so to speak, going to the point, as this was going toward that direction, but it has a slight ridge in it. So those Great Pyramid structures that you see, they actually were the perfected model of the pyramids in ancient Egypt, or Kemet, right? So nevertheless, you can go around the world. That step pyramid measure was popular. It was popular. This is just basically an old structure here. And, it's a Mesopotamian structure, but, you can see the modern look to this special demonstration. It's easy to figure out how that was done. You see? Now these are some grand drawings here, because that's some heavy stone. That's about like that type of stone the European was lifting by itself. Which again, one would have to start in order, it would be smart. I know if it was me doing it, I wouldn't be trying to pull nothing all the way up here. I would actually, if I was doing that, it would have to be some a base or a core that I started from and begin to build it out. Or even cast my stone at each level and come down a level after I cast my stone and set it, so to speak. Here's another measure in Mexico, also carved out. You can see that as clear as day, right? So, oh man, you can see the mountainous, carving here in the cutting that was done there. It don't take rocket science to figure none of that out, right? You can see this is a more modern structure here. And these are different structures, again, around the world. So over time, they perfected the science of demonstrating these things. And thus you have the many types of structures that you see on the manifest in this new era and time. So let us go a little further. Let us deal with the Sphinx. It don't take a rocket science to figure out that this Sphinx was also carved out. It was definitely carved, and at the base of the Sphinx, where you see the paws and all of that, at the lower levels, this is where you see the brickwork. Look at that. It was carved out of a greater structure. Carved and cut out. And then down here you will see the brickwork demonstrated at the base. And then we also have to remember too, over the time, to preserve, dealing with preservation, many other people begin to do work upon these special structures. So we also have to keep that in mind as well. But we already showed you what they look like from the inside. Even these particular structures, carved out of stone. Now that was some work now, because you know how hot it was out there. You ain't got nothing to cover up under, so to speak. Maybe the pyramid itself, going in them every now and then to cool off. But other than that, being out there, moving that type, boy, woo, that's some heavy work right there. And I know that by being somebody that been, on the manifest doing that type of work for years as far as construction. So looking at the ceiling here, this is the inside again of Zoser. You can see where they, over the time, are perfected certain things. This actually would look like the walls, some of those that actually hadn't been fully leveled out, so to speak, to the extent that where they begin to write upon them. You see, so a lot of the stuff that we're looking at could also be incomplete work. I would say some of it is incomplete work, you know, that was not finished, you know, due to time passing over, you know, a destruction and a fall of the civilization and so forth and so on. You know, because when different people came in to conquer, they suppressed those techniques and sciences, so to speak, and claimed the land as their own. Here's Abu Simbel here. Look at this structure. Now you would have to be blind to not see this mountain up here. And you can see where they had carved this straight up out of that mountain. They got the doorway and everything. Now they was masters at the carving and the inscription. Can't nobody take that from them. You know, but this is why these things are so ancient. That's why people be talking about, well, they 400,000, 500,000 years. Of course they are that old if they came out of mountainous structure. If you go back into trying to deal with tracing the time according to science, so to speak, and different methods of, you know, tracing the fossils and carbon dating and everything else that they like to do, right? Now, here's another measure that was actually given, because this was mentioned in the Grand Quran here, where they actually confirmed what we said about the way that they brought structures on the manifest. Right here when he was speaking of the Thamud people, which, you know, the Thamud people were mentioned often along with the Ad people. Ad, you hear me talking about Atlan. Mud make me think about the people of Mud. But hey, that's just a thought. But it states, and to the Thamud people, we sent their brother Salih and said, O my people, worship Allah. You have no other ilah God but him. La ilaha illallah. None has the right to be worshipped but Allah. And indeed, there has come to you a clear sign, the miracle of coming out of a huge she-camel from the midst of a rock from your Lord. Now, some people would think this was a camel just coming out of a literal rock. But no, if you're dealing with a mountain, which is really a big rock, and a camel come out of the mountain, you know, the miracle in all actuality has to do with the nature in which the reason of this camel making its appearance, so to speak. That's a whole nother measure. We ain't here to debate that. We want to go on. It states, from your Lord, is she-camel of Allah is a sign unto you. So you leave her to graze in Allah's earth and touch her not with harm, lest a painful torment should seize you. And remember, when he made you successors after the odd people and gave you habitations in the land, and you build for yourselves places in plains and carve out homes in the mountains. Uh-oh. So you mean to tell me they was really carving homes out of mountains? So remember, the grace is bestowed upon you from Allah, and do not go about making mischief on the earth. So here we can see the example of homes being carved out of the mountain. And this ain't the holy city of Petra, but we showed you the city of Petra where they had carved homes out of the mountain. You see this mountain and you see the structure here, right? This was carved out. That's not hard to do, especially if you perfect it to a science. Right? Climb up there high enough, get you a little rope, you know, and you can hang from it. You know, whatever you put, tie to it to sit upon. Because I'm pretty sure they was able to do that, because in the modern time, in certain high places, they have what they call a bosun chair, which is nothing more than like a 5-gallon bucket. It's more than that, but it's like a bucket or a chair sometime where you just sit on that, a special demonstration. You can get on a cord in a line and go straight down it. Where do you think they got that idea from? You see? So this is special civilization here. You can see, and I would say that it was incomplete. I don't think they just intended to leave that way. I would say that they had started but didn't complete it. But if they had gutted it all the way out like you see other things, then you would have seen the same things you see in Kemet, where you see the complete structures. You see that? That's a mountain right there. They carved that out of that. You see? Same thing here. That's a mountain that was carved out of that. Now, don't it make sense to you now? You still thinking about alien invasions? Okay, let me go ahead, right? Here's another measure in ancient Kemet. This is another picture of a Bu symbol, and we can see a lot of incomplete work here. You know, they have also the Temple of Hathor. They have one here in this special area as well. But you see this? Look at the mountain structure up here. You see that? Where they were actually carving out? That's incomplete work right there. You see the imperfection in the brick? They was just getting started on it. It's masters of stone cutting. This is what you call stone masonry. Now here's a view of it from afar, so y'all think I ain't just tripping. You think, okay, this brother, he'll say that's a mountain. Well, I'm proving it to you right now. If you can't see that's a mountain, then I don't know what to tell you. Now imagine if they had completed this and they went all the way around with the same methodology that they was demonstrating here and shaped it in every way they wanted, then it would be some other structure other than just this particular picture that you see now. But you can't dispute me and say that this wasn't carved out of a mountain. Right? That's just another one of the pictures there. Okay. Now I want to go here because I actually mentioned these before. These are actually different places. You know, this is actually, you know, some of the measures dealing with the city of Petra. They got places all over the place where people have been, they've been carving out cities for years, family. Hold up. Okay. Now that's a grand drawing right there. Look at that. Carved out of mountains. You see the pillars? That's Petra. This is China right here. Oh, they want to send ads and everything. But this is China here, right? You see a lot of the Hindu expressions here. We just showed you that one. You can see where somebody began to do work here, but they didn't finish it. You know, you can see where work was begun here. All that straight mountain. You know, so, I mean, really, it's a no-brainer. And none the least, let us come over here and show you what the European began to try to do. You know, because they wanted you to know that they was your God, if you believe them to be such. So they decided they wanted to go and deal with what they call Mount Rushmore. And this is what they came up with. So long after you gone, off the manifest, years to come, you know, these things will be here. And we know for a fact. Now, I don't know if they had any intention on perfecting that and, you know, bringing it out furthermore in detail how they wanted it to look the way they made it look. You know, and even over time, they even perfected Mount Rushmore. You know, because it didn't always look as it looked. You see, but this was definitely, you see the work that was done there. So you see the possibilities of what man can do. You know, it just depends on what man is dedicated to and how hard man is willing to work to bring his goal into fruition, so to speak. Now, this is modern expression of numerous what they like to call cave houses. So you have some people that are still trying to use these same methods and build. And there ain't need for me to go in here. You know, you can see what's being demonstrated. I made my point thus far. You know, so, I mean, we don't even need too much more in regards to dealing with a burden of proving too much outside of what we already sought on the manifest. So this deals with the explanation of the physical structures that you see on the manifest. You know, this is what we can say we got, according to this data and everything we see, proof that these structures have a mountainous core, especially when you go up under the bottom of them. Some of them look straight like bat caves when you go into the subterranean aspects of them, and they are still being carved out. And then they had to be master stone cutters, because to go in and carve different places out, one had to be precise as so that the structure doesn't collapse upon itself and keep its stability. You see? But yeah, when you look at all these things here, it makes more sense when you understand that they were carved, you know, out of a mountainous structure, and they were built in the method that we just spoke on. And now that we dealt with the physical aspects, you know, of the operative function of one building, let us go into the metaphysical and the spiritual significance of these structures. Because, you know, you got many different temples out there. And these are actually dealing with the Temple of Luxor. If you look at this, this is an aerial view, meaning looking from above, as if you were flying over this Temple of Luxor. Look at the structure. This is where the metaphysical aspects and the mastery comes in to play in regards to dealing with these special structures. If you notice them, they are built upon the structure of a human body. You know, this area here representing the entry, but this would represent the feet, the legs, and so forth and so on. You know, in midsection of the body, all the way up to the head, basically. You know, and then they give you the names of each one of them. You know, the pylon of Ramses. You see the great court of Ramses, or Ramesses, actually Ramesses. And then you have also the Mosque of Sheikh Yusuf, and this was something that was done later. You see, this was when the Arabs began to come in and take over. They wanted to, you know, pretty much place themselves into the history, you know, of the ancient. Then you have the pylon area, the colonnade of Amenhotep the third, right? Then you have the court of Amenhotep right here. You see the Hypostyle Hall up here, the chapel of Alexander the Greek. Some people think this the savior, you know, but I beg to differ. And then it's not strange that they call this area that will be synonymous with the head the Holy of Holies. All of this representing the structure. In other words, when you hear us talking about the temple of perfected man in Moorish science, this is the prime example of a temple of perfected man in the Egyptian adepts. And if you deal with the Holy of the Holies, and this is actually mentioned in the teachings of the prophet as well. But when you go into this special area here, the Holy of Holies has always been above the neck. If you look at these here, we can say, well, these are 7 chakras right here. And when you go above that special demonstration, you know, I heard, you know, from the perspective of the Arab scholars, they speak of the 8 that surround the throne. You know, that's a grand measure in and of itself. You know, some people would call it in Sufism the area of the Lot tree of the utmost boundary, a Sidrata Muntaha. See, now we're going into the metaphysics and the spiritual expression of these temples, and this is where the mastery come in. So not only were they building certain structures, but they also builded the structures based upon the plan. And most of the time they was even sitting upon the celestial host of the stars that was synonymous with them. Like, you know, when you deal with the Great Pyramid and all of those demonstrations, you know, of Khufu and so forth and so on, you will find out a lot of them are synonymous with the belt of Orion, right? And we can go on and on with those things that correspond above with those things below. The Arabs tried this with the Kaaba. They call themselves building the Kaaba beneath the pole star. You see? And, you know, they would say, well, the Kaaba is in the center of the earth. And they say that there's a celestial Kaaba directly above it. You know? But this type of science and way of building and knowledge came from the ancients. That's a whole nother measure in and of itself. So yeah, when you go back to dealing with this special structure here, and you look at it, the Temple of Luxor, or the Halls of Luxor, you know, this is actually the symbol of the order in which the Egyptian adepts claim, you know, or lay claim to. See, the Temple of Man here. And you have many examples of this. You know, you can go and do research and find out a whole lot about it. You know. And this isn't the only measure that was demonstrated. Everything that's symbolic, you know, or that is put out there for conscious minds, signs and symbols are for conscious minds. You know, those who are unconscious, they won't get it. They just won't get it. I'm sorry. You know, this is a night view. If you were going into that special complex, so to speak, if you go up through there in the Luxor temple, this would be coming in, entering from the feet. And you go all the way up toward the head, and these were places of initiation. You know, there's initiation process that take place there. So order initiation that take place within the pyramids. When you talk about the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, you know, the subterranean vault. You see? So our prophet was a master scientist. And this brings us to my particular work dealing with the ancient Egyptian rite of self-initiation. Listen to what it states. This is how I open up here. I'm touching on certain aspects. I ain't going into the book itself. In essence, there's certain things in here in relation to what we have dealt with building on the metaphysical level that I'm going to touch on. Because we say we was going to give you the metaphysical and the spiritual and the physical aspects of the significance of these temples when you deal with the ancient Kemetic order. So the ancient Egyptian adept rite of self-initiation had to do with one going into the self, dealing with self-mastery. And notice, and this is from our Moorish Holy Quran, there's a silence where the soul may meet its God, Allah. And therefore the font of wisdom is, and all who enter are immersed in light and filled with wisdom, love, and power. The silence is not circumscribed. It is not a place closed in which walls and rocky steeps, nor guarded by swords of men. Man carry with them all the time the secret place where they can meet Allah. This is why you hear us say you don't have to go into a particular structure, you know, and call it your chamber. As we just showed you, really, Luxor really represent that which is with you. The Great Pyramid is you. See, when they told you in the Piscean records, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God that dwelleth within you, which temple you are, They didn't tell you that this temple had to do with the temple of perfected man. It just sounded good, right? And oh, we don't take credit for our work. That's why we say here, divinely assisted and prepared by Bamaduti, El-Hajjat Shepsis Ray Abdu Ali, which is El-Hajj Sharif Abdul Ali, the name of Noble Drew Ali, high name of the Prophet. And it says, through MAG, Department of Library, Archives, and Wisdom, Student Adept and Divine Minister Swift Angel number 4, Dr. Shedu Amenti El Muhajjat Shepsuel. So we give the Prophet all the credit for anything that we demonstrate, right? We have our Adept prayer there, the laws of Ma'at that we go into. We go into the hallowed journey, you know, of how the Prophet, you know, went on his journey of circumnavigation, and also how he acquired his high name. Many may already have this document because I sent it out to many of our Moorish kin. Hold up. Okay. So, what we are trying to get to is this particular portion. And I see we getting a little slow movement again with this apparatus right here. But nevertheless, we demonstrated here. You see the Prophet in all his garb. We actually gave a lesson on this and showed you this is coming out of Kemet. You know, with the ostrich feather, you know, the headdress, the sash, and the whole nine. White clad soldier coming straight up out of Nubia. So if you want to know where the Prophet got his stuff, it came from the Kushites. And of course, we can't go through it without going through the Grand Man, you know, and putting his commentary in here as well, because he also set out a grand measure. He was one that was made an adept according to the teachings that the Prophet brought, at the behest of many that the Prophet had taught, not just one but many. So this is where I was trying to get to with my Moorish kin right here. We just showed you the structures. You see the Sphinx here. Now the pyramids are actually back here, but if you enter, and we always talk about how the Prophet went through his initiation process and he came out of the pyramids. You can see the junction of the chambers and the passages here to the pyramids, but he came out of the pyramids and it was said that he found himself between the paws of the Sphinx. You see, this is all beneath the ground in ancient Kemet, in Egypt. You see? Notice they say causeway cut through rock leading towards the Nile. You see these steps and everything, the arch entrance, all of this. These are master builders now. Let me go a little further here. Notice they're talking about the altar here. You see this here? Symbolic gate. They got the present states. They have the reception chamber down here, the circular temple. Notice it's all going toward the pyramid, right? This is the hallowed journey our holy prophet went through in his initiation. And if you think that this is not a place of initiation, look at what it states. This is a circular temple of neophytes. What is a neophyte? Neophytes are those who enter with a pure heart to be taught the adept mysteries of knowing themselves, so to speak. Right? These charts, they have a grand drawing in regards to dealing with them. Now, most people try to keep this type of stuff secret from you, as it is something that you don't supposed to have no knowledge of. But that's the difference between a hierophant, you know, and somebody that came to conceal the light. I'm a revealer of the light. You know, the truth is sacred, so the truth will protect itself. We don't have to keep secrets in order to keep a one-up over our people. We're going to tell them the truth. Now, whether you're ready to accept the truth, that's a whole nother story. And just because you ain't meant to accept it now don't mean you won't accept it later. It just may not be your time to unfold. You may not get it now, but you will get it later, if it's meant for you to get at all. So you see all of the pyramids behind the Sphinx. You know, and you know, everything here has a surface, below surface passage. And when the prophet was taken beneath the surface in his initiation, he was blindfolded, and he was told that if he was not able to make his way out, then he would surely die, as many had before him. Because this was the true test of him being the adept. By being blindfolded and going through that special maze, you know, and he was fasting while going through this process. He ain't have no food or nothing down there with it. Now, if you know anything about Yehoshua, when you look at his brotherhood test, they talk about how he was placed, you know, in this dark room, you know, where he had to reflect upon the signs and symbols of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. You know, this is synonymous with the same measure, and this is why the prophet brought these lessons back to our Moorish kin, so that they too will be able to go through this same process, not necessarily just on a physical, but a metaphysical level. He understood, though he went through these things in the literal sense, to go through it in the metaphysical sense, you can actually know thyself and become the God man or God woman that you are destined to be, right? So when you look at the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, you look at the subterranean chamber, you know, which would actually be a chamber of reflection, the neophyte chamber, so to speak. This really represents the physical. This represents the mental. This is synonymous with the spiritual. You see? And many don't know it's actually 5 hidden chambers in the upper portion of the pyramid. You see? This right here is basically your beginning process of initiation, so it really don't count. So if you add the 5 that are hidden to the 2, then you have 7. So this is where your 7 degrees of self-mastery derive from. A lot of people like to refer to them as the 7 degrees of the red book if they're dealing with the MST of A. You know, we call them that 7 degrees of ancient Kemet, you know, Adept mastery. So to go along with this special measure, you see, we come through with the prophet's lesson to get it to you and make it more plain. Matheno said, "Behold, this land of Egypt of the dead. Our temples long have been the tombs of hidden things of our time. Our temple crypts and caves are dark. In light there is no secret thing. The sun reveals all hidden truth. There are no mysteries in Allah. Behold the rising sun. His beams are entering every door, yes, every crevice of the mystic crypts of Mitzrayim. And we hail the light. All Egypt craves the light." And that's why you hear us referring to our chambers as the ancient Egyptian adept rite of the mystic crypts of Mitzrayim. See? And this is coming from our Moorish Holy Quran. Those who read it know exactly what's being said. So let's go a little further into these chambers that we mentioned. And as you see, I placed it here as it is above, so it is below, as it is within. The secret places of the hidden God. And I'm just really skimming over this special drawing. But it's, you know, it's a good read. But it also has to do with a measure that allow you to master yourself. And the true degrees that the prophet went through are in this special document, you know, which we'll actually get it in the physical form in due time to our Moorish kin, you know, because it's better to have something in your hand anyway. So this is the chamber of the open tomb of resurrection here. Now you think this is just a structure within the pyramids, but remember, as it is above, so it is below, so it is within. So it's actually what is within yourself. Remember I was telling you about that subterranean vault having to do with the physical? This is the chamber of reflection, or what we call the room of resolution, the preparation chamber before you can go up to the queen's chamber and make your way up to the king's chamber. But notice you coming from the hall of truth in darkness to the hall of truth in light. And this is the double hall of truth here, right? And this is the chamber of resurrection here, right? So you are the temple of perfected man. So this is what made our ancestors master builders. Not only did they build these structures again physically, but metaphysically, they corresponded with that which actually make up your being in some type of way. In this case, you're really dealing with the pyramid. Or we can even go so far as say, well, this was the bin or the capstone, you know, demonstration. You know, and so it's a lot of science in here as it relates to that which is above the neck. So this is the true expression of what it means to have an adept chamber. Nobody can make you an adept chamber in this special measure, but the great God himself. The great God Allah becomes your hierophant. Your prophet becomes your hierophant. Through deific will, all is one. You see? This is a powerful measure here. And if you go to the breakdown of this here and understand this is where your initiation, illumination, and your perfected state derive, then you understand what it means to move from a state of belief, faith, into a state of fruition. You understand the chemistry of mortal life. You understand the ministry of death and the mystery of deific life. You see? You understand what it means to unfold from black fez into the red fez and then the white fez degree. You got me? So this is the greatness of the way that our ancestors build. You see, we don't just look at them as structures. Ooh, oh, wow, look at what they did. They are so ancient and marvelous and so forth and so on. No, these are centers of reflection that were based upon your very own makeup. Look at this when we go back to this special drawing. All this having to do with the functions of the dial plate, or what we call the brain. You see this? The true king's chamber is right here at the center of your thinking. So don't let nobody fool you by telling you they can take you in a building and make you something that you was already born to be, and then take all your finances and your money. So notice it states one night he slept, slumber kept, doze, not alert. At midnight hour, a door, which is a mental interest into the self or gateway of his accomplished mind, that he had not observed was open, and a priest in somber, which somber deals with dismal, toned down, subdued, muted, not flashly or stylish garb, they came in and said, "You are the victim of a cruel plot. The priests of Heliopolis are jealous of your fame, and they have said you will never leave these gloomy crypts alive." Now, if you are thinking on the manifest level, the truth being concealed not by somebody else but you, because you refuse to think, you know, the truth being concealed is that the priest in somber garb has to do with your own thought pattern. It has to do with the thought of doubt. Whereas the higher self is directing you into the heights, then there's another measure trying to pull you into the manifest. And so, just as it spoke of one sleeping, this sleeping is not dealing with just laying back, and just going to sleep. Notice it says here, when one dreams, one's consciousness naturally shifts to the back of the head. This is more so the case when one has a lucid dream. One's reptilian brain stem, reticular activating formation, determines the depth of one's quantum realm of dreams. It is via one lucid dreams one can contact another form of intelligence. We call this astro traveling, or we call it going into reading the Akashic records, or the book of the registry of Allah's remembrance, right? Which the ancient Egyptians considered to be associated with Sirius, or the essence of one's lucid dreams, or one's personal stargate. You see Orion, and you see how this is coming up from the king's chamber dealing with Osiris. You see the queen's chamber going up to Isis or Set, the eye. It's all here, Moorish kin. So the true ancient order of the Kemetians, the order of Osar, the order of Oset, is found above the neck. You don't have to pay for it. All you have to do is tap into your mind and be yourself. See, we're going to make it plain for you. We ain't got no reason to hide it from you. We're going to give you the truth. Right? Here's a measure dealing with going deeper into the brain and how it relates actually to the eye of Heru. And many of you have already seen these comparisons in many different areas. This as a whole dealing with the optic thalamus. But the optic thalamus is not alone, because you have also what you call the pineal and the pituitary gland. You hear about Jacob wrestling with God at Mount Peniel. But the mount actually has to do with the pinnacle of his own thinking. He wasn't wrestling with a God outside of himself. He was wrestling with the God within himself. You got me? But that's a whole nother lesson in and of itself. So, Kemetically, when you look at this, you can see the eye of Heru. What is known as the Ujet or Waj in the Grand Quran. So that brings us here. It states, you are within a holy place, and you will see upon a living shrine the candle of Allah flame. And when you see it burning there, look deep within the temple of your brain, and you will see it all aglow. In every part from head to foot are candles, all in place. When you hear people talking about the 7 candlesticks in the book of Revelation, the churches of Asia and all this type of, you the Asiatic. So synonymously with yourself, those 7 candlesticks or 7 churches represent the 7 chakras, which also represent 7 temples that are found upon the Nile Valley civilization. There's an initiation process there, just waiting to be lighted by the flaming torch of love. Love is the key to unlocking your consciousness. If your mind is bound down with hatred, and self-hatred more than anything, you can't ignite your consciousness to think above your condition. So this is why you have to be divinely trained by the Adept or the Hierophant within you, in order that you may unfold into the realization of who you are. And thus, this is why it was written within the temples of ancient Kemet, know thyself and thy Father God Allah. We told you that we was going to speak on that Savior that was sent to Egypt. You see, the Egyptians. And we knowing that all people pretty much in this era and time, especially in the area of Africa, you know, as they like to call it, you know, they pretty much got a Kemetian bloodline in them. So if you look at the Moors being the custodians of the wisdom, and how it has reached us, the true savior of Egypt would be our holy prophet himself when he became a neophyte and he learned the mysteries and he mastered the teaching. He was the wise man from the east who brought these teachings of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice to the west. Harmony, truth, balance, right, order, and justice. That's the ancient Kemetian way, right? So it says, when you see the candles all aflame, just look, and you will see with the eyes of soul in the waters of the fountain of wisdom rushing on, and you may drink there and abide. It states, and the curtains part, and you are where the ark of Allah rests, whose covering is the mercy seat. Fear not to lift the sacred board. The tables of law are in the ark concealed. Where's the ark? Where are the tables of law? Above the neck. This is why in our divine constitution we are told that we must preserve our holy and divine laws. They must become a part and parcel of us. The 7 acts are synonymous with the 7 days of creation and the 7 stations within yourself. Take them and read them well, for they contain all the precepts that man will ever need. So everything that you need to know as far as dealing with the law, it's actually embedded in your being. It's encoded in your DNA to be the God man and God woman that you are, be the return of the ancient ones. So all one does when you meet a master teacher, a mastermind, or the hierophant is actually make you aware that you have the keys to be able to civilize your own mind. And also with those same keys, you are able to civilize the rest of fallen humanity. And that simply comes by being the message that you bring. But it says, and in the ark, the magic wand, for they contain all prophecy. And it lies waiting for your hand. And the hand is symbolic to the mind. It is the key to all the hidden meanings of the present, future, and the past. The cherubim have guarded well for every soul this treasure box, and whosoever will may enter in and find his own. Now, many don't know when you're dealing with the order of the seraphim, or the seraph, the cherubim, or the cherub, or you deal with angels and men, which deal with the 4 quadrants that surround the flag that we have in the Moorish American government, or that surround the 7 in the expression of dealing with the circle 7, or surround our seal when we deal with our seal of salvation. Hear now, ye cherubim, ye seraphim, ye angels, and ye men. It's important that we understand this. The cherubim, being that cherubims among the ranks of angels, this is a thought of Allah manifested in the flesh, in your treasure box. Where's your treasure box? Above the neck. So if you enter in, then you may find your own. And this is where your own portion of understanding comes from. After you have been awakened to the truth of yourself and to the truth, you know, of that which had been hidden at one time. And at the root of the word cherubim, you see heru. So as a whole, when you deal with this order of seraphim, the seraphim actually deal with, you know, the council on high in divinity, such as our holy prophet, as he works from the plane of soul. You see the cherubim working in conjunction with one, because we are able to function upon the plane of soul and the plane of things made manifest. You are able to go up into that special realm as a mastermind. This ain't nothing spooky. And you can communicate via the mind and read the book of creation. Read the true expression of Medu Netta that is found in the essence of your being. Language of God, that's all that means. Signs and symbols that deal with a consciousness in your mind. So cherubim, at the root, herein, this would actually represent the masterminds or the hierophants that are in the fleshly form that have become the angelic thought of a swift angel. Because it's one thing to know that an angel is a thought of Allah manifested in the flesh, but it's another thing to materialize as that thought. It's one thing to teach about love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, but another thing to materialize that special thought. Right? So the cherubim represent those who are executive rulers right now. And they are getting the lessons from the ancient ones who are the seraphim again. This is how we keep in contact with the prophet, the ascended masters, the gurus of all the times and the climes, past, present, and future. Then it say it is the key to all hidden meanings of the past, present, and the future. This is that arc dealing with these four quadrants. So we say here now, ye seraphim, ye cherubim, ye angels, and ye men. And man is the singular form of the plural term man. Men, pardon self. Man, in this case, I always said Moorish American national. That's a whole nother measure right there. So this brings us back here to that true and living temple of God. And this is what makes our ancestors so much master builders. They were building simultaneously structures while building the character of man to be a perfected being. You see? So we don't want to get that confused with anything that you can find Romanized or Westernized. Right? So here's another measure here, coming from our Moorish Holy Quran. And many don't like to say circle 7, but the prophet say every meeting's supposed to be open according to the circle 7. So what do you think he meant? But that's a whole nother measure. It states, for as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar. We talked about the altars in the beginning, right? With this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship him, declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, and dwelleth not in temples made with hands. So don't get caught up so much so into the physical structures that you got to go into a mosque, a synagogue, a temple, a church, or any man-made structure. Don't get caught up into that special measure to that extent to where you worship it more than you worship the great God that is within yourself. Because God made, or the God that made the world and all things therein, according to the measure states, seeing that he is the Lord of the heaven and earth, and dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Corner thoughts and corner tools are useless. This was the note in the workshop of the mind, where thought is used to build up character. You can't use a real literal hammer, to build within the workshop of your mind. And if you hit yourself in the head with a hammer, then you out of your mind anyway, talking about building the character. If you use a saw on yourself physically, then you crazy. If you demonstrate along that special measure. So when you use these tools within the workshop of the mind, where thought is used to build character, this is the grand drawing. So it states, neither is worship with man's hands, which deal with the corner thought, hand being symbolic to the mind, as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. This is coming from the Piscean records. And notice right here, this states the Adept, right? So the true Adept is made above the neck. Don't let nobody fool you. How do you think Prophet Noah Ali became the Egyptian Adept master that he became? And to foundate this special measure, the teacher treads the way on every span of the ground, and he leaves his footprints clearly cut, which all can see, and be assured that he, their master, went that way. Men comprehend the inner life by what they see and do. So this is the reason why our ancestors chose to build, because they knew during that time doubt had to see its God. And then they could comprehend the inner meaning of life by what they were able to visualize or what materialized before them. This is a science that many of us have lost in this era and time. That's why it's so hard for us to be reached and reach each other as a people. It states they come to Allah through ceremonies and forms, and so when you would make men know that sins are washed away by purity in life, a rite symbolic may be introduced. And this is why we introduce the ancient Egyptian Adept rite of the mystic crypts of Misraim, so that one will become a master of the self. You know, and we're going to close on this special note. You know, and this is where you come into the concept of the circle 7. You know, because in ancient Kemet, the 7 Ali, you know, which is synonymous with the 7 Elohim, the Neteru, that you see here in this boat being lifted up by Shu, Shu being the holy breath. You know, you see the symbol of Kefri, you know, eternal life. You see Ra, divine light here. The deities coming down from on high, bringing wisdom, because wisdom speaks from out of the highest plane of spirit life, right? You see the boat being used as a vehicle to transport, so to speak, these conscious beings throughout the celestial realm, or along the lines of the celestial now. Oh, we real with it up in here. So the 7 Ali, the 7 eyes of Allah, the 7 chakras, the logos, circle 7, the initiate, neophyte, student, adept, this is what they are to become when they perfect themselves through the cycle of perfection. And this, in the Kemetian language, is known as the Shenu Sefek. Shenu meaning circle, Sefek meaning 7. So with that right there, we're going to circle the 7. And we just say gratitude to your family. And hopefully, you know, this measure is worth the while to one that they may be going to a state of self-reflection and become masters of themselves. Because we're not here to play with our people. Islam. Yes, sir. And indeed, as our beloved brother Ashby Bay said, you know, in the comments, I see it now that I have came over here in this area. He say, teach them Zephaniah Paneth. You know, and Zephaniah Paneth is actually the name that deals with the high title or the name that was given to Joseph. And matter of fact, here you have it here. This is Zephaniah Paneth. For those who haven't been familiar with this name, Zephaniah Paneth. Zephaniah Paneth, again, is a name that was given to Joseph. By the pharaohs of Kemet. And it actually had to do with the circle and the 7 as well. But it really is also another terminology which had to do with the name for a hierophant, or a revealer of the mysteries. You see the definition here, Zephaniah Paneth. The name given to Joseph by the Pharaoh on the occasion of his promotion for showing the Pharaoh the meaning of his dream. So Joseph was a man who was able to demonstrate a revelation through the dreams. And so being that he was able to demonstrate this in special measure, he was referred to as a revealer of the light, basically. And when you go into this actual degree, you know, as it states, the one who furnishes nourishment of life, you know, the chief steward of the realm. He was an adept. That was his Egyptian adept name. You see? The God speaks and he lives. He was given a signet ring by Pharaoh and everything. He went through the brotherhood test, especially the one in regards to dealing with the wife of Pharaoh or Pharaoh. You know, this is a powerful demonstration. You know, so when you do the research, you know, this was a grand find because it actually shows that his name is synonymous with the 7th Adept degree that the prophet himself received. And we actually mentioned the 7th Adept degree, you know, in my work. You see? So, to go back there, as a matter of fact, everything that had to do with the Kemetian teachings really go within the self. You know, if you're able to read and study that way. And that's how we really pointed it out. But let me go here. And this is actually dealing with the structure of the degrees. And they are actually here. So in this particular portion, you know, when you come through these degrees, and I actually touched on this before, you know, you got 7 of them. You see, Hesteperu, which is known as Pastaphorus in the exhuming of a nation. Then you have Nuakheru, which is Neokoros. Mu'alu Neferu, which is Melanophorus. And then you have Kestepheru, which is Kistophorus, or Kistophorus, Bel Alatu, and this is Belhate, you see. Then you have Ashu Taramusa, which is Astronomus, which is also known as Mor, the priest, the high priest, right? And then this is the 7th, Sefek Nu Pekheru, which is synonymous with the name Zephaniah, Peneth, Sefet Penka, Propheta, illuminated one. This is why you hear us saying that our holy prophet got his degree of prophethood out of ancient Kemet. Kemet either comes to a prophet or the prophets find themselves in Kemet. And we can say this about most of the major prophets that you think of in this era and time, all the way from, you know, Abraham up to Ali. You see? So in this special measure here, you find that the element is dealing with ether. Aden is the master word. This is the temple of the Grand Hierophant. Isha and Ish, or Ish and Isha, which is Shu and Ashu. This degree has to do with enthronement. The man who knows the mysteries, full illumination and unification with divinity. And this is what Joseph himself became, and this is how he acquired that title, Zephaniah Peneth. This is how the prophet ended up being known, or he mastered the degree of propheta. You see, these are the ancient Kemetian degrees upon which many rites, such as the modern European rites of the 96 degrees, you know, of the rite of Mitzrayim, the way they demonstrated, they actually took it from these foundational degrees, which no man has laid claim to this era and time. Read the teachings of Manly P. Hall when he speak on the ancient Egyptian masonry, and watch what he say. Our burial, it states here, is really entombment of the original white fez of the Moorish Egyptian adepts being changed to red, then finally the black fez worn to this day. The pure meaning of the white fez is God, but when purity is slowed down by the rate of atmosphere, it becomes cool to red. Black is but a word, right? Not a color. And the word means death. The Turks don the black fez because it means that they are chief morticians of the African god-man whose code name is infidel, heathen, NBC, hieroglyph through Western Freemasonry. Some Moorish in the West have been marked with the black fez to denote their continual enslavement. Some people don't like that, but it's the truth. And this is why we say we start off coming out of the black fez degrees. This is the grotto. You see, when you get past these three, then you come to the level of the red fez degrees. You see, and you get beyond the radar of the atmosphere in your thinking, then you obtain the white fez degree. This is the king's chamber. Notice this level is the queen's chamber. Notice this level is the grotto or the subterranean vault. And all of this is basically a part of the ancient Egyptian ladder of initiation degrees, the ancient Kemetian order of the pyramid rite of the mysteries of Osar and Oset. So, key aspect, and I want to touch on this before I close out, because I'm closing now. This is a key degree right here when you deal with a neophyte who want to be admitted into a knowledge of themselves. That's coming out of that earth-bound element. Preparation, purification of the body, and development over control over the physical appetites. A preliminary testing in emotional response and intelligence, willpower, and obedience. So you can't even begin to come into this initiation process if you can't control your passions and your desires, if you don't know the proper function on how to use your compass and your square to keep your passions and your desires in the bounds of righteousness. And I keep telling you more, especially the ones that are on the manifest now, the tests are on the manifest. Do you think you would be here being left alone saying you believe and you will not be tested? So the Prince of Strife must first, the Prince of Peace must first be the Prince of Strife, so to speak. So we have to stir up the ethers, you know, when we taking one through these special measures here. That's another measure, but that's the only way you can circle the 7 and become the temple of perfected man. So we just say gratitude, peace, love, and law at all costs. Islamism, we love your Moorish kin. And here's something else to grow on.